Hello. Okay, so as we begin this morning, I want to jump right in. And I want to say that I am particularly grateful to have you, Dasee, here at our shul back at Temple Emmanuel, which is your home. So I want to welcome you home to Newton, Massachusetts today. Here you are literally in Temple Emmanuel as you're coming in from your office to my office. And I want to invite you to, first of all, share a little bit your book about becoming a soulful parent. The path to the wisdom within is so shaped by your own life experiences, and you're so generous with your own life experiences. So I want to begin at the beginning. Tell us how your life experiences have been shaped by your home here at Temple Emmanuel, here in Newton, growing up in Boston. Share with us how your world and your life has been shaped by your foundations.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me here and for such a gracious introduction. And it's so wonderful. I'm going to get myself out of the spotlight view and to the gallery view because I just want to see all these beautiful faces. And it's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I'm really delighted to be here. You know, we had Michelle and I had some time last week to talk about to prepare for this, and there was just like so much that came from me of Temple Emmanuel. This is the place where it actually was proven to me that children can sit in shul, because I was that kid who actually sat in shul between my mother and my father. And back then everybody noticed that I was the only child, and my sister was also, we were the only children maybe who were sitting there. But you know, since then I think my kids are like opt in for sitting in shul, and sometimes they'd rather be playing soccer outside. But so I'm so grateful to be here. I think when I think about becoming a soulful parent, you know, I think that I came from a family of soulful parents, and a soulful mother and a soulful father, and soulful grandparents, and they just didn't, you know, write the book on it. But I think that it was really in my, you know, kind of in the air that I breathed at home. I think when I think about the unconditional love that I experienced growing up, I think that that is a lot about what this idea of becoming a soulful parent is about. The soulful piece is really this recognition that each of us has a soul, each of us is unique, each of us has a certain tikkun or a corrective to make in the world. We came here for a reason, and there's something special about every single person in the world, on the Zoom call, in our families, and that, you know, when my parents saw that, you know, that my sister is different from me, that we needed different things, that we needed to be listened to in different ways, that we were encouraged and kind of like pushed forward to do what we wanted to do in life, based on who we were. I think our favorite story is that my parents, you know, would sit around with other parents whose kids made Aliyah. I came to Israel when I was in my 20s, and you know, maybe some of my parents' friends or colleagues would say, you know, you let them go to Israel, and you let them, you know, you let your daughter live in Israel. And their reaction was, how couldn't we? You know, we say that it's important, and we would travel there every summer. And of course we'll let her go, and we'll support her, you know, all the while that she's there. So I think that, you know, those early lessons, I think, were just so at the foundation and the grounding of who I am, that a part of the process of writing this book, honestly, is to share through my own life experience now as a mother, married to Leon, and as a mother of 3 kids, to be able to share a little bit of that. I would even say magic that I experienced, with in my own way and in my own words, with others.
Mm. So I have this image of your mother and your father, your mother of blessed memory, sitting here in the back rows at Temple Emmanuel, and your mother just radiated so much grace. You dedicate your book to your mother, Moselle. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is about her that helped you find your own path to soulful parenting?
Yeah, well, I think I would say two things. I just want to read the dedication I wrote to her, that your love is beyond measure and transcends worlds. And there was this book actually I wrote while she was in the process of declining health, and I was kind of rushing to finish it, and I wanted to read different parts of the book to her, so that she would really have as much of an impression of it, so she would know, that legacy that she's had. I think the piece about love is foundational. I think that sometimes it's hard for me to admit, but sometimes it's hard to love our kids. Sometimes they act in a way that's just beyond the pale, or they're rude or uncooperative. And sometimes I find myself, I mean, it certainly happens when they're like physical. I'm like, can you just not push my chair right now? Like, I'm in my chair. I didn't ask you to push it. Let me just stay here. You know what I mean? Like, just give me some space, and I think we all feel that, especially in the situation of the pandemic, and we're all at home, and a lot of us are having our kids on their Zooms, and it's like the walls are closing in. I feel like the opposite with my mother. I think she taught me expansiveness. She taught me generosity. She's taught me abundance, that there's always, when there's love, there's always abundance. You're never at a deficit. And I think the other piece that she taught me, and I just thought of this yesterday, and this really came from her background and her professional life as an administrator for special education in Newton. Um, she had this line that all behavior is communication. So anything your kid is doing or saying or whatever is happening at home, they're trying to communicate something to you. And they just don't have the words or the ability or the capacity to share in the way in which, we would assume a rational 25-plus-year-old whose neurons are all firing in the right way, or in the most evolved way. They're not capable of doing that yet. So for us to be able to just really figure out, what are they trying to tell me now, and that's our job. So that line absolutely just goes through my mind all the time.
Mm, I really, I'm sitting with that really deeply because the beginning of your book, you lay out, I bet we have a lot in common, and I bet you all have a million parenting books on your shelf. And I could imagine from the example that you had of all action as communication, right? Everything your children are doing, they're trying to tell you something. Could imagine trying to write a dictionary, right? How does this behavior map onto what they're trying to tell you? And to be really instructive about the way that one might write a book. And instead, your book is very open to not just wisdom from outside, but the wisdom in your own heart. And I was particularly struck by the way that you cast ego wisdom and soul wisdom. And I'd love if you could share with all of us today a little bit more about why you didn't write a how-to. I, I need a I need a crib sheet on how do I understand my child's communication. And yet you said before you can do that, or perhaps as part of doing that, you need to understand you. Talk to
Mm-hmm.
us about that.
Yeah, thanks. That it's a beautiful question. I mean, I think that there's so many layers of it. First, I just want to share this anecdote that my kids have picked up on things, and they've said to me when they see me acting a certain way, they'll say, "Das, Ima, that's really not a soulful parenting moment right there for you." So I'm like, "Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your input." But I think that the organization where this book really emerged is Ayeka, and it's the Center for Soulful Education. And our practice at Ayeka is fundamentally to ask ourselves the question, where are you? And, it's the first question in the Bible that God asks of Adam, when he was hiding after eating the forbidden fruit, and he was physically behind a tree, and we should have, imagined that God would have known that, God being God. But the question of Ayeka that he was asking as Rav Kook puts it, was not about physically, where are you, but emotionally, kind of spiritually, where are you? Kind of, have you been lost? Have you gotten off track? Are you responding in the way that your kind of highest self would mean you to respond? And I think that there are ways when we can ask ourselves questions, it can be redemptive. When we're told what to do, when we're given advice. I mean, even on this call, and I just want to see a show of hands, when is the last time you got a piece of parenting advice that you followed? Raise your hand. When was the last time you got a piece of parenting advice that you didn't follow? I mean, I find that for myself, whenever anyone tells me what to do, immediately I'm like not going to listen. I mean, maybe it's just me and like quirks of my own character, but I imagine that there are some of us that, instead of, and I think that we thirst for it. I mean, if we were to think about this, I love to think about of a a triangle, or a pyramid, that on the bottom is information. We have no shortage of information, and we all know this. Anyone who's been diagnosed with anything is going to like find all the information about whatever the thing we've been diagnosed with, or any behavioral issue, that we're experiencing. We'll find ourselves Googling the most like ridiculous things that we know we actually can't find an answer to, right? Above that is knowledge, and knowledge is something that comes with time and takes, years, and you have to process. And the final piece at the top of the pyramid is wisdom. And wisdom is something that only we know, that only we can arrive at over years and through, through a lot of time and through a lot of trial and error, and through opening our ears and our hearts to everything that's around us. And so instead of being on the how-to place of the information and even the knowledge, I mean, because there are beautiful books that are written, from beautiful child psychologists that are much more knowledgeable than I am. But I think I wanted to do something a little bit different and get to that smaller piece of that search and that thirst that all of us, I think, really deeply have of 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 gaining more access to a knowing place, a deeper knowing, wiser place with our children. That my son, sometimes he would say to me, Ima, like I remember this one book that I read about, how to talk so your kids will listen and listen so your kids will talk. And there are so many scripts there. And so I would use them. I was like, I'm just going to say the same thing again and again and again. And Tamir said to me, Ima, why are you saying the same thing again and again and again? And I'm like, oh, because I'm following that script, right? Like, I don't actually need to follow this script. If I slowed down, if I thought about who he is, what's his uniqueness and the way he operates in the world from what I know about him, and what's mine from what I know about me, how can we arrive at some more, elevated place? And I think the way to that place is through questions, that open questions, questions that are generous, questions that aren't accusatory, but questions that like really open up spaces inside of us, have the potential to be redemptive. So I think, so that's really what I try to do in the book, is bring a lot of personal examples, not for the purpose of everyone being like, oh God, that lady's a little crazy. She really needs a how-to book, on how to parent better, but much more from the generous place to say, we're all in this. We're all on a journey. We're all in it together. And the ego is that sometimes we see Facebook families looking amazing. And we were just talking, Michelle, about how I was like feeding my kids spinach pizza on Thursday night, and you're like, oh God, she has it together. And I just admitted to her that my kids don't actually eat spinach pizza. Like, my husband and I like the spinach pizza, but we're doing that all the time with each other, right? All of us. But to kind of quiet that ego place of like, who's doing better kind of thing, to just like to the soul place that says we're all uniquely gifted to be just the right parent for the child that we have.
Which is so beautiful. I love the way that you trust and you put out for each of us that we can trust that who we are is enough, and who we are, in fact, is a blessing and a gift to our children that we can mine, right? And you do that so concretely in this story that I just adored from your book. It's on, starts on page 23, but continues on page 24. I wonder if you could set up the story of Shulamit for
Yeah.
us, because this is a great story.
There was a situation in my daughter's kindergarten class where she and this other girl were being really feisty and, like, quite frankly, mean to one of the afternoon helper people. With like a sayatot, they're called in Hebrew, which are helpers, and the afternoon staff. And they really, it caused like a big commotion in the gun in this kindergarten. And so the kindergarten teacher called me in, and we're sitting in this like little makeshift closet. If anyone knows Israeli, underfunded schools, they'll know, like, these are the private places that you have. And we had this meeting where she was very stern. Shulamit was very stern to my daughter, that this behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and this can't go on, and these are going to be the consequences for this behavior. And at the end of it, she said, now go out and play. And it was obvious that she didn't want to play. She just wanted to kind of cuddle up into my arms. It was like a very stern reckoning that this teacher was levying on this child. She deserved it, but it was still very stern. And I felt myself like I was crumbling inside, and I write in the book how I started to tear up, and I'm like, inappropriate, Dasee, hold it together. It's the kindergarten teacher. You need to actually have some, composition here, be composed. So I wrote, since that encounter, I have attempted to instruct myself, be the kindergarten teacher. If only I could command the same level of respect and clear-headed discipline at home. The day after the meeting at school, I found myself copying the kindergarten teacher's approach, channel your inner Shulamit. But I'm not Shulamit, I'm me. And while I may be able to learn from her approach, I ultimately need to find and refine my own, as we all do. My daughter doesn't need another Shulamit. She needs me to be me.
So speak to us about not being Shulamit.
I think that there's something about, we were actually talking about this with the rabbis or teachers or parents. And I know this now, and I feel this very deeply, having lost my mother, that our children will never have different parents. They will never have a different mother. They will never have a different father. They will never have a different grandparent. And so for us to know and to fully embody the people that we are in parenting our children, and to have them know that every lesson that they're going to learn in life, for good and for bad, they're probably going to learn a large part of that from their interactions with us. And I think that putting that in a perspective, when sometimes, quite honestly, especially as they become older, and you have a teenage daughter, and my 12-year-old is a 16-year-old in a 12-year-old's body, that they can be dismissive, and they can overlook you, and you can feel like, am I having any impact here? And so I think that this to imagine, to use our imaginative powers, to believe that we were called to be the parents of the children that we have, can be incredibly calming, incredibly empowering. And to know, I mean, my kids all the time are like, but that family does this and that family does that, and why can't you be more like this? And it's like, well, too bad for you. You're stuck with me, you know? So, and for us, not only to embody it in that sense of, wow, I feel emboldened by it, but to also know that the values that we have that are really important to us are really important values to have and to convey, in all the different ways that only we know how to convey them, and not by lecturing all the time. I mean, as fun as that can be, but also by our example and by what we choose to do and how we choose to spend our time. So I think that if anything, if I would ask for parents to take one thing away from this book, it would really be to feel fully embodied in ourselves and in our and who we are as parents, and to know that that's critically important for our kids.
Mm. And as I'm listening to you, I'm holding the tension between my inner truth of how I would parent differently than you would parent, differently than any number of the people on the call would parent, versus a sense of, but I can learn from you. I can learn from each other. How do you hold those two poles? And in particular, I want to ask you to reflect on that through the story of the sitting down in the chair when you
Mm,
get home. And that story is found on page 76. If you could read that to us.
absolutely. Okay, so I'll read this piece. We experience several not so sacred moments in our home, especially when I bring all my kids home from school at the same time. Bursting through the door, my children fling their respective backpacks hither and thither and then start negotiating who gets to watch my computer first. Homework first, I shout to the air as I turn my attention to the dishes and the veggie plate I busily prepare before they get to the pantry to snatch a snack. Coming home sometimes feel like starting a sprint, not relaxing into a sanctuary. I'm always coming up with all sorts of new plans and approaches and charts of how things should be at home. But sometimes when I get home with my kids, I decide to do something different. I walk through the door and sit down. Radical, right? I happen to sit down on the comfiest chair in the house, the one that is situated right in the middle of the living room. There, I just relax for a few minutes, 5 to be exact. And my short term life goal is to bring that number up to 10 or 15 minutes, but 5 is a solid start. When I started to do this, I noticed something remarkable happen. My children, who would otherwise be running in all directions, slowed down. Like a balloon losing air, my youngest, the most energetic runner, gradually began to drift toward me, landing on my lap. The fact that I chose to experience our home as a place of rest and renewal, even if just for 5 minutes, invited her to do the same.
So that's a serious pro tip right there. How do you balance in your book and also in your life the tension between my own core inner truth that I already know and the pro tips that I want to achieve?
Yeah. I would say, like I think about it with regard to identity and maybe identity and identification, I would say that we can all identify with each other. And, I want your 5-minute recipe for like an awesome dinner immediately, and I want you to send that to me. If anyone has one, I want you to send it to me in the chat right now. And if it can involve broccoli that's disguised in some way, I'll be even happier. But and we all want that, of course, and we're all gonna, seek that out, and we do that, and that's how we live our lives, because we also live in community. We don't live monastic lives, somewhere on a hilltop. But together with that is, so that's our identification with others, but together with that is our identities, not to, like, my thing of the chair is because my kids are really energetic. My friends who have kids who are total bookworms and not at all social want something altogether different. They're going to want to like come into the house and throw a ball around so that everyone's interacting and cooperating with each other. So it doesn't help you for me to say, this is what you must do. This is what I do because of how my family is, constituted, but not for everyone. So I think that not to lose our own identities as we're identifying with other people and want to share. I think that's what I think about it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that leads to the fact that this book, every chapter, and then in fact, an entire appendix at the end, you have questions that you ask us to ask ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I want to ask you, if you had to choose one question that you ask in throughout this book that is a workbook for each of us, that is the most important one for us to ask ourselves as parents, what would it be?
Well, if you'll notice, if you do a scan, you can see that there's actually a structure to each of the questions. And the questions usually go, imagine is the first question, like imagine a different reality than if you want to. The second one is what gets in the way of getting to that reality. And the third one is what's a small step you would take in that direction. So that's really the structure of most of these questions. And I would say that the last one, what's a small step you would take, probably that's, I think, where I'd start. I think that a part of the book is, we call it becoming a soulful parent. Not, my publisher wanted me to say, what did he want? She wanted me to call it, lessons from a soulful parent or something. I was like, get out of here. No, we're not calling it that. But it's becoming a soulful parent because we're in process. We're all in process all the time, and I'm thinking now about Tu B'Shvat that's coming. And there's this beautiful idea of Allah hasraf be'ilanot, that the sap is rising in the trees, like in the dead of winter. That's what's happening now. Like, look at these trees and they're moving. The sap is rising in the trees, ready, ready for the flowers and ready for that process, that will be happening, over the spring. And that's what take one step in that direction is. It's, what's rising in you, kind of what's that vitality in all of us. And I mean, I know not more than I know, as we all know, there's such fatigue and we feel so just, I mean, what parents have had to do over this period, during this pandemic, it's been such a challenge. So how can we believe, imagine, kind of, just open ourselves up to this one step that we might possibly take in a direction that could move us to some place that we would want to be, where we aren't yet.
Mm, wow. I love that response. Now, you were writing this very high level, thoughtful, almost meditative invitation to soulful parenting. And then the pandemic hit. And you described beautifully in both your forward and then throughout some of the edits that you made into the book about how the pandemic really has shifted and changed your parenting and all of our parenting. I saw some echoes of the approach that you took in your writing about chaos and the Jewish understanding about chaos and how we manage that in difficult times. And I'm wondering if we could get, although you do write specifically about the pandemic in your book, if we could get at sort of the deeper underlying
Yeah.
wisdom that comes in here through page 85 in your book, about chaos as a precondition to creativity and how that impacts your parenting in a pandemic.
Yeah. So shall I read from it? Should I read that, please?
Please,
Okay. So
please.
this is um, chaos as a precondition of creativity. Parker Palmer writes beautifully about the connection between chaos and order. Our initial impulse as parents is to organize and orchestrate things so thoroughly that messiness will never bubble up around us and threaten to overwhelm us. But as Parker reminds us, chaos is the precondition to creativity. As every creation myth has it, life itself emerged from the void. Even that which has been created needs to return to chaos from time to time so it can be regenerated in more vital form. Chaotic feelings are inherent in any creative process. Each child, parent, and family will inevitably go through periods that are dark and murky. This chaos is okay and even sometimes necessary so that something new can emerge. And I think about it both developmentally as well as, through Jewish sacred texts. Developmentally, if we were to think about, the terrible twos, and we think about the teenage years, and we think about midlife, that there are always times when we're kind of cycling right through difficult or turbulent times, and then coming out with some clarity at the end of it. And even in small ways, I don't know if anyone relates to this, but you could be in a small task that you're doing and you're like, what am I doing? Like, I'm so confused as what I should be doing right now, whether it's we're reading something we don't understand, or we're fixing something and it doesn't make sense, or I'm now working on a Hello Kitty puzzle of 500 pieces. And I'm like, where is the bow going? Like, I have no idea where it's supposed to go, and I know 500 pieces isn't so impressive, but like it's hard for me. So just that sense of like, I'm lost. I don't know where to go here. So I think that when we look at it through kind of the lens of Jewish texts, and we look at the creation story, right? We look at this tohu vavohu, this kind of murky place. God just, is creating the world. Created light, and that's it. And then there's this tohu vavohu, and it doesn't go from creating light and darkness and then going on to every, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. There's this moment of tohu vavohu that's there. And I think it's really instructive for us as a metaphor that things aren't just like, let's make a list. Okay, guys, come on, we're going to go, we're going to do the thing, and off we go. None of our lives work that way. As much as we might express that our lives are lived in list form, for all the things that we can check off at the end of the day. But there's so much that's going on there in between. So it's really just an invitation to say, yes, it's there, and yes, instead of us trying to, sometimes we can have this experience of, oh no, you don't feel that way, to our kids, or it'll get better, just be friends with that kid instead of this other kid. Instead of doing that, for us to honestly honor that murky place and say, okay, I'm with you. I can't fix it. I don't know. I can't go to the container store and contain it. I'm just going to be here with you in it. Here we are. Okay,
A-
we'll get there,
And how does that translate for you into this pandemic moment?
I think that it's I mean, there's definitely been days. Oh my God, there have been days. I joked to someone earlier. They said, how do parents do it? How do they, take care of their kids and work? And I'm working from home, and I'm like, you either neglect your work or you neglect your kids, and it's like, what can you do? You can't do everything all at the same time, But I think that just those ways in which your house can be a cauldron, of everyone needing help and everyone getting on and off their Zooms and everyone needing to eat all the time and there never being anything good in the house, like, ah, da, da. And then one day you realize, oh, buy the snacks and just put it on the table so you don't need to make the meal for them, or like make sure that they're set up by printing out their stuff the night before. My youngest is 8 and happened to do that, and it worked better today. So the systems that you'll put in place, the systems that you need to put in place based on what's going on at home, but and also honestly for me, because I have a partner, to be able to rely on each other a lot more, I think, than we did before, right? That there was, it was more obvious how much he worked and how much I worked, and now it's not as obvious. He takes the morning sometimes, I'll take the evenings, and so I think that a lot of new insights and reorganization happened because of this.
You speak about partnership, and you have actually, one of the things I loved about your book is that in its center, you have not parenting, but partnership with your spouse. And that parenting emerges from the conversations and the challenges that you have there, as well as from the relationship just with your children. My last question for you before I open it up for other people to ask will be about this beautiful section that you speak about being a partner. And everybody on this call, I really recommend that you look into this book for this section, because there's so much more than we're going to be able to cover right here. But just for a little taste, page 35, where you talk about sweetheart, I have decided, at the bottom of the page.
Oh, so after a day of chaos, and not chaos, but just being like not really particularly kind to each other, I wrote, sweetheart, I have decided to treat you like my coworker. Coworkers are always cordial to one another. He laughed gently and nodded. And furthermore, I continued, I think the senior management team of Berkowitz Morris Ltd is in desperate need of a team building retreat. So then we went away on a weekend away.
So talk to us about why that's sort of right there in the center between these other parenting pieces of advice. Tell me what the wisdom of partnership gives you for your parenting.
Yeah, I think that there are two pieces here. One is that you're really greater than the sum of your parts, that there is something about our partnership that we were meant to do in the world. And when I think about that in terms of family, like we were meant to bring this family into the world. So that gives it just this kind of added level of meaning and direction. So that's a lofty kind of vision that I definitely try to hold on to, and might surface a lot more around anniversary times and even on Shabbat on Friday night when we sing to each other. Um, but I think on a much more practical level, there's this concept that I talk a lot about in the book of an ezer kenegdo. You know, when we think about the first relationship between Adam and Eve, without going into the kind of feminist critique of it, Eve was meant to be an ezer kenegdo to Adam. And that those words, ezer is a helper and kenegdo is standing in opposition. And I just think that that's a fascinating turn of phrase, you know, an ezer kenegdo. Like, what does it mean to be a helper that stands in opposition? You know, and I think we know, I mean, we just had an inauguration, an election, and, you know, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and just like we need to have healthy opposition, right? In order to, you know, hold the whole picture together. In a couple, we need to have healthy opposition of some on a team, you know, in a work setting. You don't want to have someone who's just going to say you're great and you're wonderful and everything's fabulous. But if you can have someone that says, oh, maybe we should do it this way, or did we think about this also, or let me bring this other perspective. That's really where I want to be most. You know, when I have a different, you know, perspective from Leon, or when he does from me, and we are different. You know, while we're both the youngest sibling, which makes us common in many ways, we are really different in our orientation. And obviously, this opposites attract is you know, a piece of it. But when the opposites attract thing fades, and it's like that was for the first few years of marriage, and it's like, wow, you know, we really look at the world differently. I think it's kind of pushing against this idea that parents always have to be on the same page all the time with their kids, which for some matters, absolutely. For other matters, I think it's important for them to see that you're different people and you look at things differently. And guess what? People in the world look at things differently. And if I can experience that at home, I can probably understand human dynamics better. I can understand, build, you know, greater resilience, you know, when I navigate those differences. So that's really the piece. I think there's a lot of wisdom to the help being sometimes in that different perspective.
Mm. And I said it was my last question, so I will open this up. I just want to note for everybody listening that you very graciously in your book actually place out there that not all parents are doing this within the context of a relationship, and that there are other ways that people can think about their dynamics. So I also don't want to lose sight of how really respectful and honoring you are of the different ways that people parent as
I
well.
would just I just want to add to that, you know, I think that what the invitation at the beginning, and I see Noah on the call, and you commented on this when you got the book, you know, you said, thank you for the invitation that I don't have to read it in one setting, you know, like I can pick it up and put it down. And I think there are a lot of sections, you know, I wrote about siblings, and there are a lot of parents who have one child, you know, so skip that section. And if you're not partnered, skip those sections. Or if you have a very difficult relationship with the grandparents in your life, don't focus there, you know, so pick and choose and jump around. You know, that's real. It's I wanted the book to reflect our busy lives, and to be able to glean anything that we needed, or inspiration that we might need, or questions that we might need to ask ourselves when it felt the most appropriate for us.
Mm. I'm going to ask if there's anyone who would like to ask your own question here. I see Lloyd David. Lloyd,
Hi, Lloyd.
my neighbor.
Hi, Dasee. Dasee, I think I'm channeling your father. I'm so proud of you listening to you talk, and I'm very anxious to read the book. I have one question. Could you define what you mean by soulful?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a great question. I think that when I think, right, there are these terms that we sometimes say, heart and soul, and is your soul into it? And I think that when I'd say soul, I think it's the part of God that is within us. And when I look at Jewish texts, and I look at the first story of the first stories in Genesis, and the creation of Adam, the first earthling, the human being, came to life because God breathed into Adam a soul, a nefesh, and he became a living being. And it's kind of based on this idea that sure, we have a lot of genetic makeup, and we have, our physical bodies and our muscles and our bones and our skin, but there's this other element, which I think the word soul, certainly in our Jewish tradition, is very much apt there, that is this gift that we've received from something beyond us. Some call it God, some call it harmony, some call it life longing for itself, but something beyond us that's within us also. And that is, for me, is what a soul is.
Thank you.
Any other questions from other participants? While we're waiting, you guys can all, if you want to chat in a question too, you can privately chat me and I will share it if you don't feel like sharing it yourself. In the meantime, one of the things that's so interesting to me, Dasee, is how you root all of your wisdom within your own experience. Why was it important to you to do that in this book?
I think that it makes it authentic. I think that, there are some other beautiful books, that I'm thinking about. Lisa Miller's book called The Spiritual Child, or another book that looks at, history and sociology of parenting, oh, it's called All Joy and No Fun, I think it's called. Um, and there's so many ways of coming at parenting books, psychology and sociology and history and neuroscience, and I think that there's almost there's an authenticity that can come when it's one parent who's writing to another parent. And some people have this experience that I'm having in this process of sharing this, which I really do feel like it's a little bit sharing my neshama with everybody, like a little bit of my soul with everybody, is I'm doing that because I think it's important for all of us to create relationships where we can share our souls with each other. And whether it's in synagogue settings or in school settings or in family settings, or in friendship circles, that we can kind of just open ourselves up. I think that life is very short, and we are noticing how short life is and how precious life is, and that all of the good stuff happens when we have real connection with each other. And that's really what the invitation is here, just to open ourselves up to more real connection.
Thank you. Heidi, you had raised your hand. Heidi Lack.
Hi. I can't help but hear that behind you is, or within you is, some Musar or Tikkun Amidot or something like that. I think Ayeka is also affiliated with that. And so what I hear behind what you're saying is really strong bitachon, and emunah, trust and belief or faith, that is through this essence you're talking about, this ratzon, this soul desire, this coming from beyond, that is the breath that has created who you are, that you are bringing to your parenting. It's wonderful, and I feel that at times, but I know that so many parents don't feel that and can't trust that. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. Thank you. And absolutely, I very much valued some Musar classes that I took while I was in New York, and have loved Alan Marinis's work. And I think I remember actually sitting in those sessions, and it felt like I couldn't ask the question. And my question was, do you really believe in God? Like, do you really believe in this? And it felt like it was taboo. Like I kind of like got there at chapter 2 and everyone already had like read chapter 1 and was like, okay, we got chapter 1, now let's just jump into chapter 2. And I really, I just remember that experience. And I think this, it was really a process for me. And I think that what happened is that for me, I am choosing to live in a world where God exists, where there's meaning to things that are happening, that to have faith that things are to have faith in my kids actually, and to keep faith in my kids, to keep faith in my marriage, to keep faith in myself, you know. And I think that it's really a choice. And I appreciate what you're saying, because it very much speaks to, I think, where I was. And I remember just thinking, I was like, I'm so envious of you guys who seem to like know what you're talking about here. And I think that there were some books that I wrote about, that I read about what God is, that one in particular about how God is the force that makes for good in the world. And without scrutinizing that too much, and thinking about, well, but what about evil and what's the place of evil, but just being able to hold on to that idea that God is what makes for good in the world. And I was sharing with Michelle earlier this another concept that I've heard and I like very much about gratitude, which is that we can't be grateful for everything that happens, but we can be grateful for the opportunity it presents. That was actually said by a monk whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, but it was such a reorientation for me, right? To say, you know, I want to be grateful for during this pandemic, while there's so much suffering, I'm you know, much more mindful of friends of mine who are single in my community, and bringing them food more and calling them a lot more often than I was before. I wasn't really attuned to their experience, or I'm grateful that I can really understand what my kids are able to do learning wise, and what's more challenging for them, you know. So I think that this piece of really being honest and recognizing, well, where am I, right? That Ayeka thing, that Ayeka question. And also for me, not being afraid to continue to extend an invitation that just is honest and open, and shares from our own experiences, and also what gives us great meaning in our own lives.
Thank you so much, Dasee, for that beautiful reply. I have two final questions that I'm going to jump in and ask you. One is that as I'm looking through this gallery, see a number of parents, I also see a number of grandparents here. Can you share with us a little bit of your wisdom on grandparenting?
Well, I don't have personal wisdom on grandparenting. I think everyone here who's a grandparent would probably have a lot more wisdom than I do. But I would just say that there's a very special place where parents sit, which is really at the intersection between their parents or the grandparents, and their children. And I think that what I write about in the book is how can we really open up that channel widely, so that there can be more flow between the generations. You know, I think that there's a great gift that grandparents offer in terms of how to deal with resilience, in terms of the stories from their childhoods. I was going through something that my sister put together, and this is my reading on Shabbat, which was letters of my parents that they wrote to my sister, that just sharing about different moments in their own childhood. And I was reading this, and it was like my dad's bar mitzvah thing, and my mom, how she like skipped out on her classes, you know, and she like never learned Urdu or whatever language in India. And it was just remarkable. And it, like, what a treasure trove, right? That all of our, you know, grandparents are just, they embody history, you know, they embody history. And that grandchildren embody eternity, They embody the way that, grandparents and great grandparents and some parents will never understand the reality in which they're growing up in which they will be masters over. And this ability to touch eternity, which now it sounds lofty, and it's now like, why do they know how to do so much more tech stuff than I would ever know how to do? But the curiosity that we can invite our parents or the grandparents to have of the grandchildren's lives, and to just ask questions and ask about this and ask about the skateboarding and ask about, what's going on with her love of dogs and whatever, all of those things. So I think that that's really the piece there of how can parents just open up that relationship.
Mm. So that leads into my final question and our final question for this session, which is that you end your afterword with, I pray that my soul muscles continue to strengthen over my life. I pray that yours do too. And I want to ask you, we have the holiday of Tu B'Shvat coming up, and I'm mindful of the way in which Tu B'Shvat speaks to the possibility of planting within each of us the opportunity to flower in our own place, and that we need to water and tend and make sure there's enough light. What would be your Tu B'Shvat blessing for the parents and grandparents on this call?
So thank you for asking that. Beautiful. So, well, one's very practical, which is to go outside more. And it's amazing what happens when we go outside, especially now when we're not going outside so much, and just listen to the birds and listen and feel the cold on your face, and know that all the stuff that's going on or not going on in our homes, that we're a part of something a lot bigger. And the other actually has to do with fruit. I'm always amazed that we don't. It's not a celebration of root vegetables. It's a celebration of fruit. And the reason it's a celebration of fruit is because fruit is process. That's what fruit is, right? Fruit grows, fruit falls, the seeds of a fruit are planted again, and the cycle continues. And so I think that my blessing really is to believe in becoming, to believe in process, to believe in embodied experiences, and to enjoy the sweetness of the fruit when the fruit comes, and just enjoy it fully. And also to know that when the fruit has been picked and is ready for the next cycle, that the tree will flower again, and fruit will be born, and we'll enjoy it again together.
Amen. Thank you, Dasee, for just a really wonderful and uplifting morning. We wish you a Laila Tov there in the Holy Land pretty soon. And always just want to extend the invitation. You are welcome at home, always, anytime. Temple Emmanuel is so grateful that you have continued to grow from these roots, and we're super delighted to be able to share in that journey with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.